This dresser was neglected, used up and rejected. Another furniture flipper gave up, said time, well, they didn't have enough. Nails all around. The feet separating from it now. Deep gouges on the sides and the top. Even the trim pieces taken a lot. Working through the problems, excited and ready. Don't worry, I didn't use a machete. Can I even save this defeated dresser? Alright, here we go. No pressure. This piece was something I picked up from another furniture flipper. Paraphrasing, she said she didn't have the time to fix all of the things wrong with it. So I'm going to preface this with the majority of this video is fixing all of the broken things with this dresser, because there's a lot. It was so messed up that I couldn't logistically even start with cleaning. There were other things that had to be taken care of in its place. Not to say that I don't clean, because I do. But I'm going to start off by taking off the hardware, because there's not enough to actually put this hardware back on the dresser. And in some cases, the hardware was in two different pieces. So that's where I started. The handle on the top right drawer had just the post left. It was screwed in so tightly that I couldn't remove it by just simply unscrewing it. I ended up having to use pliers to hold it in place, and then I could unscrew it. There were a ton of random nails all around this piece. I'm not sure if the previous flipper put these in or if they were from the previous owner. Something to consider when you're repairing furniture is a lot of this does not require nails to fix it. Most things can be fixed with wood glue and pressure, which is pretty easy to do. The left front leg was probably the worst on this entire piece. There were, I want to say, right around 6 different nails nailed into it. And you can see the dowels there, the 2 little posts. They're not glued anymore, and simply just adding glue and some pressure to that would have corrected this. And then probably screwing in the connector board between the 2 legs would have resolved it. But it seems like somebody was trying to fix it by nailing it all together, and that just, it doesn't work. Not only that, but the side panel that fell off had a bunch of nails that they tried to nail in to keep that on, and there's enough of a flat surface there that all it really needs is glue, and again, not to sound like Billy Joel, but pressure. That's all it needs. The left dresser panel needed all of the nails removed from it. After removing the nails, the brace part was no longer attached to the panel. So what I did was I hand sanded off the old glue on the brace and the panel. Whenever you're trying to apply glue to those surfaces and there's old glue on there, you want to remove it because it will mess with the adhesion. I then applied a healthy serving of Tight Bond wood glue, and I used clamps to clamp the brace to the panel. When you're doing these sort of repairs, you want to make sure that your placement of the brace on the panel is correct. I paid very close attention to where it was located before I unnailed it from the panel itself, so I knew exactly how this needed to fit back on there. But this isn't one of those things where you take it apart, you walk away, and you forget. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck putting the panel back on the dresser and then marking it. Like I said, we're a little out of order, but I really didn't want to work on getting tetanus with all the nails poking out of this dresser, so I'm pretty sure you understand that, hopefully. So for cleaning, we're going to start with removing the wax, or what was hopefully wax, and there's some paint spots on the dresser, and all I'm doing is just scraping it very lightly with my carbide scraper and just getting the bulk of the material off of the dresser. After I removed the major chunks of things from the dresser, I sprayed everything down with Crud Cutter. By everything, I mean inside and outside of the drawers and the dresser. And then I came back and wiped all of the surfaces with a damp cloth after I did the initial wipe off of the crud cutter itself. I'm going to start off by making repairs now since the dresser is clean and degreased. The first thing that I'm going to use is Gorilla, the all-purpose epoxy stick. And this is a putty-like substance that you cut off a chunk and then you knead them together until the color is uniform. I do recommend wearing gloves. I'm only using the Gorilla epoxy on the giant chunk that was missing from the bottom trim. You'll want to mold it as close to the trim as possible because it dries really hard and eats through sandpaper. I also used we'll say a generous amount, and because of that, I let it dry for 2 days just to be on the safe side. Next up, I'm going to use Varathane's 2-part wood filler to fill in the missing veneer chunks. Most of the drawers have damage on the bottom of the drawers, probably from just general use. If it wasn't too bad, like if it was just smaller spots, I'd probably just use some walnut wood filler on those spots, but a lot of them are missing large portions of the veneer. That top drawer specifically, where the can is resting, is missing an entire slice along the bottom portion. To fix the front leg, I poured an excessive amount of Titebond wood glue into the separated areas. I then tried to tap and pull away at the joints to allow more glue to seep in between them. After a quick moment, I realized I just needed to let gravity do its work. Clamping was not an easy task for the specific pieces because there's such odd angles, and I don't have a clamp where I can put it from one leg to the other. So I ended up using a bunch of smaller clamps, and I used some of my larger clamps to clamp upward to the body of the dresser. Have you ever wanted to remove marker from raw wood but didn't want to sand it? Well, I have just the product for you. From the makers of Crud Cutter, I give you
Graffiti Remover!
It removes aerosol paint, enamel, lacquers, and even your child's handmade art projects. Simply spray it on the surface and let it soak in following the directions on the bottle. Wipe away the excess and reapply as needed. This product should not be used on surfaces that you do not wish to remove. This is not a sponsored advertisement, I just think this is cool. After the wood glue on the legs had enough time to dry, I came back and removed the clamps and lifted the dresser up on its side. I needed to reattach the side panel to the dresser body, and there is no good way to clamp this, but I can use weight to help the two surfaces make good contact. I applied wood glue to the body of the dresser, spreading it out all over the surfaces that will make contact with the side panel. I then very carefully took the side panel and placed it on top of the dresser, adjusting it as needed to get a good level surface. Next, I placed a board on top of the panel, and I'm going to begin looking for random objects throughout my garage to add weight to the board. That way, they're not scuffing up the already damaged side panel that I had already filled with wood filler. Once I had good pressure on the center, I went for the sides and began clamping them. I waited 24 hours for the wood glue to dry, and I came back and removed all of the things that I put on top of the panel. Finally, I can start sanding. So I started off by sanding down the 2-part Gorilla epoxy on the dresser front to get that all smooth. I went in and smoothed out any of the rough areas where the 2-part epoxy had been used. And since there was so much epoxy on the drawers, I sanded the finish off of those as well while smoothing out the repairs. There were already a lot of scrapes and scratches on the top, but I really wanted to preserve the walnut finish. So I started off by removing the finish with my carbide scraper, which was a true labor of love. And I actually went in after I'd removed the majority of the finish and used 150 grit sandpaper on my orbital sander to get the rest of the finish off. I had a distinct feeling that I blew through some of the veneer and I needed to find where all the little scratches were on it, so I poured an excessive amount of mineral spirits on the top of the dresser so that I could see where the veneer was blown out. And if you look at the right corner, you're going to see that spot. There's actually a really gnarly dent there, and I left the sander on it for just a little bit too long. But that's not bad. I'll use some walnut wood filler and fill that up, and it'll look good as new. General Finish's Antique Walnut Gel Stain is what I chose for the stain color of this dresser. I applied it using a staining pad, wearing gloves, and moving in a circular motion to apply a generous amount to the top of the dresser. The top was a large surface area to cover, so I applied enough stain to keep it moist as I was covering it from right to left, and I immediately removed it after I reached the other side. When wiping off the stain, you'll want to wipe it down in the direction of the wood grain. The application of the stain does not need to be applied with the wood grain. In fact, my preference is to buff it so that I make sure I cover all the surface. But when you're removing it, if you have any streaks from the stain that dry on the surface, you're going to want them to dry in the direction of the wood grain, and that can be accomplished by wiping the stain off with the wood grain. I applied the Antique Walnut Gel Stain to the 6 bottom drawers on the dresser, following the same process, applying the gel stain and then wiping it off. I used Melange mineral paint in jet black. I applied it to both sides of the dresser and inside as well. In total, I ended up applying 3 thin coats, which helps to create an even surface. Your first coat is always going to be somewhat transparent and it's going to look like crap. And then when you apply your second coat, it's going to look even better. And then as you apply your third coat, it's going to look pretty darn good. I did not primer this surface because 1, it's black, and 2, this dresser didn't seem like it would have a wood bleed. And yes, you can see wood bleeds through some black paint. In preparation for painting the drawers, I applied tape to the bottom portion of the drawers. If you haven't guessed already, I'm not painting the entire drawer. I'm going to paint just the damaged parts of the drawer, which will be the bottoms on all 6. I'm also going to primer the top 3 drawers with the woven rattan drawer fronts because those 2 will be painted. I chose to primer them because there's a metal detail on it, which I scuffed up before primering, and I don't know how the paint will adhere to the rattan. So I used Rust-Oleum's gray primer, and then I sanded the primer down with 400 grit sandpaper after it dried to smooth things out. I painted the drawers using the same technique as the dresser body. I applied 3 thin coats of paint, allowing it to dry in between coats. After I applied my 3rd coat of paint to the drawers, I then removed the tape while the paint was still wet. Now, to me, this is one of those weirdly interesting topics where some people like to watch the tape being removed and they find it satisfying. But for me personally, I get anxious because I'm looking for a mistake. Usually I feel better after it's taken off and it's either a small little blip or it looks perfect. It's great when it's crispy, but when it's not crispy, it's just soggy. I grabbed some 400 grit sandpaper just to scuff sand all of the surfaces of the dresser before I went in to apply polyurethane. To seal in all of the surfaces, I used Varathane's oil-based polyurethane in a satin finish, and I ended up applying 2 coats to the body and the drawers. I went back in and applied 4 coats to the top because it goes on pretty thin, and it just wasn't quite as glossy as I wanted it to be on that 3rd coat, so I quickly went in and used 400 grit sandpaper again just to knock off any of the imperfections, and then I applied that last final coat. Congratulations, you've reached the end part thing. Quick reminder of the dumpster fire that we started with. And here's what it looks like now. I didn't mention this, but the drawer lines are actually getting smaller by 1/4 of an inch as they go down. And I also bought new hardware, which I'll link below in the description if you like it and want to pick that up from Amazon. I hope you enjoyed this transformation, and thank you for watching.